What really happened to Madeleine McCann? 18 years after the 3-year-old British girl vanished from a Portuguese holiday apartment, German prosecutors say they know who took her, but admit they cannot prove it in court. Christian Brueckner remains the only suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, yet German authorities acknowledge their evidence cannot secure a conviction. After £13.2 million spent on the UK investigation alone, extensive searches across Portugal in 2023 and 2025, and the German suspect's release from prison in September 2025, the case remains unsolved. 3 countries continue active investigations into what German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters calls their only suspect, but no charges have been filed related to Madeleine's disappearance, and the evidentiary threshold for German courts has not been met. The evening of May 3, 2007 began routinely enough. Kate and Jerry McCann, both 39-year-old physicians from Rothley, Leicestershire, were enjoying the final days of their family holiday at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz, a small coastal town in Portugal's Algarve region. They had arrived on April 28 with their 3 children, Madeleine, who would turn 4 in 9 days, and 2-year-old twins, Sean and Amelie. The McCanns had established what seemed like a reasonable routine during their stay. Each evening, they would put the children to bed in apartment 5A around 7:30, then join 7 friends, a group that would later become known as the Tapas 7, for dinner at the resort's tapas restaurant. The distance seemed manageable, approximately 55 meters as the crow flies, though the actual walking route was slightly longer. On that Thursday evening, the group left for dinner at 8:30. The adults had arranged a checking rotation to monitor their sleeping children throughout the meal. It was a system they had used successfully throughout the week. The restaurant was visible from the apartment building, though crucially, the apartment doors themselves could not be seen from where the parents sat. The McCanns kept the front door of apartment 5A locked throughout their stay, but they left the rear patio doors closed but unlocked. This was deliberate. It allowed them to check on the children without carrying keys back and forth. The sliding glass doors could only be locked from inside and overlooked the pool, tennis courts, and ultimately the tapas restaurant where they dined. At 9:05, Jerry McCann left the table to check on the children. He entered through the unlocked patio doors and walked toward the children's bedroom. The door, which he had left slightly ajar when they departed for dinner, now stood nearly wide open. He found this unusual but not immediately alarming. All 3 children lay sleeping in their beds. Madeleine was in her typical position, her pink comfort blanket and beloved cuddle cat toy beside her. Jerry pulled the bedroom door nearly closed again and returned to the restaurant. The check had taken less than 5 minutes. At approximately 9:15, Jane Tanner, one of the Tapas 7, left to check on her own children. As she walked up the street, she passed Jerry McCann, who was returning from his check and had stopped briefly to chat with another British holidaymaker named Jeremy Wilkins. Tanner continued past them and observed something that would dominate the investigation for the next 6 years: a man carrying a child in pink pajamas, walking away from the apartment block toward the beach. Tanner thought nothing of it at the time. Holiday resorts are filled with parents carrying sleeping children. She completed her check. Her daughter had been sick earlier and returned to dinner without mentioning what she had seen. At 9:30, Matthew Oldfield, another member of the group, offered to check on the McCann children when he checked on his own. He entered apartment 5A through the unlocked patio doors. The children's bedroom door, which Jerry had pulled nearly closed just 25 minutes earlier, stood wide open again. Oldfield listened at the doorway. He heard no noise, no crying, no movement. Crucially, his position at the door meant he could see the twins' cots, but not Madeleine's bed, which was positioned around a corner and out of his direct line of sight. Satisfied by the silence and the sight of the twins sleeping peacefully, Oldfield left without entering the room, far enough to visually confirm Madeleine's presence. At 10 o'clock, Kate McCann left the restaurant for what should have been a routine check. She entered through the patio doors and immediately noticed the children's bedroom door standing wide open, exactly as Oldfield had found it 30 minutes earlier. When she attempted to close it, a draft from the bedroom caught it and slammed it shut with unexpected force. Kate reopened the door more carefully and stepped inside. The twins slept undisturbed in their cots, but Madeleine's bed was empty. Her pink comfort blanket remained. Cuddle Cat lay abandoned. The little girl 9 days from her 4th birthday was gone. Kate ran toward the bedroom window. The curtains, which had been closed, now hung open. The window stood open. The exterior shutter, which could only be raised from outside, had been lifted. Cool night air flowed into the room. Kate McCann ran from the apartment toward the tapas restaurant, screaming words that would echo through 18 years of investigation. "Madeleine's gone! Someone's taken her!" The critical 90 minutes, between Jerry's check at 9:05 and Kate's discovery at 10 o'clock, would be dissected by investigators across 3 countries for nearly 2 decades. Somewhere within that window, a 3-year-old child had been taken from a holiday apartment while her parents dined close enough to see the building's rooftop. The immediate response was chaotic. Resort staff and holidaymakers joined the McCanns and their friends in searching the complex and surrounding streets. The local GNR police, Portugal's National Republican Guard, arrived at 11:10, roughly 70 minutes after Kate's discovery. But criminal investigators from the Polícia Judiciária did not reach the scene until approximately 1 o'clock in the morning on May 4th. By the time serious forensic examination could begin, approximately 20 people had entered apartment 5A. The crime scene, if it was a crime scene, had been thoroughly contaminated. Fingerprints, if any existed, would be impossible to isolate among the dozens that now covered every surface. Trace evidence had been disturbed by well-meaning searchers moving through the apartment. The forensic damage extended beyond the apartment itself. Roadblocks were not established until 10 o'clock the following morning, 12 hours after Madeleine's disappearance. The motorway monitoring company Euroscut later stated that police never requested surveillance footage of vehicles leaving Praia da Luz during the critical hours of May 3rd and early May 4th. If an abductor had taken Madeleine McCann, they had been given a 12-hour head start before roadblocks were established. They could have been across the Spanish border just an hour's drive from Praia da Luz before police sealed the roads. They could have reached Madrid, Seville, or any major Spanish city by the time investigators secured the crime scene. Apartment 5A itself became central to understanding how an abduction could have occurred. The unit occupied a ground-floor corner position in the 5th block of the Ocean Club's Waterside Village complex on Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva. This location created multiple vulnerabilities that investigators believe an abductor exploited. The apartment had 2 main access points. The front door, which faced an interior courtyard and parking area, remained locked throughout the McCann's stay. But the rear patio doors, which could only be locked from inside, had been left closed but unlocked specifically to allow the checking rotation. These sliding glass doors overlooked the pool, tennis courts, and the tapas restaurant beyond. A small gate and several steps led directly from the public street to this patio, meaning anyone could approach the unlocked doors without being seen from the restaurant. The children's bedroom window created the second vulnerability. The window itself sat at waist height and overlooked a narrow walkway used by residents accessing the car park. Beyond this walkway stood only a low wall separating the apartment complex from a public street. An adult standing on the street could easily reach over the wall and access the window. The McCanns have consistently maintained they kept this window's curtains and shutter closed throughout their stay. Kate McCann specifically remembered closing them that evening. The open state she discovered window open, shutter raised, curtains drawn back became one of the investigation's most significant forensic questions. Had an intruder opened the window from outside to gain entry? Or had they opened it from inside to exit while carrying Madeleine, finding the patio door's route too exposed? The shutter mechanism added complexity. The exterior metal shutter could only be raised from outside, either by reaching under it or through an open window. Investigators tested whether the shutter could be silently raised. It could not. The metal rattled distinctly when moved, yet none of the McCanns, their friends checking the apartment, or nearby residents reported hearing this sound. Adding another troubling element to the security failures, resort staff had written a note in the swimming pool reception's message book on May 1st, 2 days before the disappearance. The note documented the McCanns' regular table booking at the tapas restaurant for 8:30 each evening. Crucially, it mentioned that the group's children were sleeping in the apartments during these dinners. Kate McCann later expressed deep concern that an abductor may have observed this information. The message book sat in a semi-public area where someone with basic access to the resort could have read it. If a predator had been watching the resort, hunting for vulnerable children, this note provided a perfect blueprint. Which families had young children, where they dined, when they would be absent from their apartments, and the fact that the children were left sleeping and would need to be checked. The proximity calculations remain haunting. The tapas restaurant sat 55 meters from apartment 5A as the crow flies. The actual walking route, following the paths around the pool, extended this slightly. But the crucial detail is what could be seen from the restaurant. The diners could see the top of the apartment building, the rooftop and upper walls. They could not see the apartment doors. They could not see the window to the children's bedroom. They could not see the narrow walkway beside the building or the low wall separating it from the public street. From where the McCanns sat, they could verify the building still stood. They could see lights in upper windows. They could observe the general direction of their apartment, but they could not see their actual apartment or anyone approaching it. The checking rotation was essential because visual monitoring was impossible. The police investigation that followed would be marked by errors, contradictions, and ultimately, the archiving of the case. In July 2008, after 15 months of investigation that produced no arrests, no charges, and no answers. But before the investigation could even begin properly, before the forensic teams could process the scene, before roadblocks could be established, Madeleine McCann had vanished into a warm Portuguese night. The 90-minute window between Jerry's check and Kate's discovery remained the only definitive timeline investigators possessed. Somewhere within those 90 minutes, in an apartment 55 meters from where her parents dined, a 3-year-old girl was taken. The how remained a mystery. The who would become an obsession spanning 3 countries and 18 years. The why would never be answered. The morning of May 4, 2007 brought international media attention that would never fade. Within hours, photographs of Madeleine McCann, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, with a distinctive coloboma defect in her right eye where the pupil ran into the iris, circulated across Europe. By evening, her image had reached every continent. The Portuguese investigation, led by Inspector Gonçalo Amaral of the Polícia Judiciária, initially focused on potential abduction. The Jane Tanner sighting became central, a man carrying a child in pink pajamas, walking away from the apartment block at approximately 9:15. Tanner worked with police artists to create a composite sketch. The image showed a dark-haired man of average height carrying a small child whose feet dangled visibly. On May 14th, 11 days after the disappearance, police designated Robert Murat as their first official suspect. Murat, a British-Portuguese property consultant, lived with his mother just 150 yards from apartment 5A. He had voluntarily helped police with translation services in the investigation's early days, but his presence and behavior drew suspicion. 3 of the top 7 claimed Murat had been present outside apartment 5A on the night of May 3rd. Murat vehemently denied this, stating he had been at home with his mother all evening. His mother corroborated his alibi. No evidence linked Murat to the disappearance. Extensive searches of his property, including ground-penetrating radar examination of his garden, revealed nothing. The investigation took a dramatic turn on July 21, 2007, when British cadaver dogs arrived in Portugal. Eddie and Keela, 2 Springer Spaniels handled by Martin Grime, had been trained for different but complementary tasks. Eddie detected the scent of human cadavers' bodies that had been deceased for at least 2 hours. Keela specialized in detecting human blood, even in minute quantities, or after cleaning attempts. The dog's examination of apartment 5A produced alerts that would dominate headlines for months. Eddie marked several locations: behind the sofa in the living room, in a wardrobe in the main bedroom, and on Madeleine's cuddle cat toy that Kate McCann had been carrying constantly since the disappearance. Keela alerted to possible blood behind the same sofa and on some of Kate McCann's clothing. But the most controversial alerts occurred on August 6th, when the dogs examined the Renault Scenic that the McCanns had rented 24 days after Madeleine disappeared. Eddie alerted to the lower driver's door area and the boot. Keela indicated possible blood traces in the rear of the boot and in a map compartment containing the ignition key. Samples were collected and sent to the United Kingdom's Forensic Science Service for analysis. The results proved inconclusive and, ultimately, deeply problematic for the prosecution theory they seemed designed to support. The blood traces discovered under tiles behind the apartment sofa were too degraded for definitive DNA analysis. The sample yielded partial DNA markers, but forensic scientists could not conclusively determine whose DNA it was, or even confirm it was blood rather than another bodily fluid. The car boot sample became even more controversial. The analysis revealed 37 DNA markers total. 15 of Madeleine's 19 known markers were present. But crucially, 4 of her markers were absent. The Forensic Science Service could not explain why some of her markers would be present if the sample came from her body, but others would be completely missing. The agency's conclusion was carefully worded. The sample was not a unique match to Madeleine McCann. The presence of some matching markers suggested possible contamination or degradation rather than definitive proof. The scientists explicitly stated they could not confirm the sample came from Madeleine. Handler Martin Grime himself cautioned investigators about interpreting the dog's alerts. He wrote in his report, "The dog alert indications must be corroborated if to establish their findings as evidence. No human remains were located during any of the searches. The dogs had alerted to something. But what? Cadaver scent could potentially transfer through contact." Kate McCann's work as a family doctor meant she had regular contact with deceased patients. The twins' diapers and clothing had been transported in the rental car's boot. Cross-contamination seemed possible, even likely. Yet these inconclusive forensic results contributed to the Portuguese police's decision to declare Kate and Jerry McCann official suspects arguidos on September 7, 2007. The declaration suggested investigators believed Madeleine had died in the apartment, that her parents had concealed her body, and that they had later transported it in the rental car. The theory required several enormous logical leaps. The McCanns would have had to hide Madeleine's body somewhere for 24 days throughout the most intensive police investigation and media scrutiny imaginable, then retrieved it and moved it in a rental car that they knew police were monitoring. They would have done this while coordinating media appearances, organizing search efforts, and meeting with government officials across Europe. Inspector Amaral's investigation pursued this theory aggressively. Phone records were examined. Financial transactions were scrutinized. Behavioral analysts studied the McCann's body language during media appearances. Nothing substantiated the theory that Madeleine had died in the apartment, and her parents had concealed this. On July 21, 2008, after 15 months of investigation, the Portuguese Attorney General archived the case. The McCanns and Robert Murat were cleared of any involvement. The Attorney General's statement acknowledged, "No element of proof whatsoever was found which allows us to form any lucid, sensible, serious, and honest conclusion about the circumstances in which she disappeared." Portugal's investigation had cost millions, involved hundreds of investigators, generated 40,000 pages of documentation, and produced no arrests, no charges, and no substantive progress toward finding Madeleine McCann. The case sat archived, officially unsolved, but not actively investigated, while the McCanns continued their private search efforts, funded by Madeleine's fund, which had received £1.8 million in donations during its first year. Inspector Gonçalo Amaral had been removed from the investigation on October 2, 2007, after telling newspaper Diário de Notícias that British police had pursued only those leads helpful to the McCanns. He retired from the police force in July 2008 and immediately began writing a book about his investigation, Maddie, A Verdade de Mentira. The Truth of the Lie was published in Portugal in July 2008. Amaral's book alleged that Madeleine had died in apartment 5A from a tragic accident, that the cadaver dogs had correctly identified death scent and blood traces, and that Kate and Jerry McCann had staged an abduction to cover up their daughter's accidental death. The book became a bestseller in Portugal, selling 180,000 copies within months. It earned Amaral €342,111. It also triggered a 13-year legal battle with the McCanns that would reach Portugal's Supreme Court, and ultimately, the European Court of Human Rights. The McCanns obtained an initial injunction banning the book's sale in Portugal in 2009. They sued Amaral for libel, seeking damages for the harm his allegations caused to their reputation and their ongoing search for Madeleine. A Lisbon court awarded them €500,000 in damages in April 2015, but Portugal's appeal court reversed this decision in April 2016, finding that Amaral's book was protected speech under Portuguese law. The Supreme Court upheld this reversal in January 2017, ruling that Amaral had the right to express his professional opinion about the case. The McCanns appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, arguing that Amaral's false allegations violated their right to respect for private and family life. In September 2022, the ECHR ruled unanimously against them. The court found that Amaral's book served the interest of public debate about a case of enormous public concern. The judges noted that the McCanns had already been publicly identified as suspects by Portuguese authorities before the book's publication, meaning Amaral had not introduced new harmful information, but rather expressed his interpretation of publicly known facts. The court ruled that freedom of expression, particularly on matters of public interest, outweighed the McCanns' privacy concerns in this circumstance. Amaral maintains his position today. In August 2025, he told Sky News that the parents remain the principal people responsible for what happened to Madeleine and that Christian Brueckner had nothing to do with Madeleine's disappearance. While the Portuguese investigation stagnated and then halted, The McCanns pursued every possible avenue independently. They hired private investigators, engaged media consultants, coordinated awareness campaigns across Europe, and lobbied governments for assistance. David Beckham, J.K. Rowling, and other celebrities recorded video appeals. The Pope received the McCanns in Rome. Billboards across Europe displayed Madeleine's photograph. In May 2011, following the publication of Kate McCann's book, Madeleine, and a petition signed by 20,000 people, British Home Secretary Theresa May requested the Metropolitan Police review the case. What began as an investigative review evolved into a full criminal investigation in July 2013, designated Operation Grange. At its peak, Operation Grange employed 37 personnel, 29 detectives, and 8 civilian staff. The team's mandate was comprehensive: review every piece of evidence, investigate every credible lead, and bring new resources and perspectives to a case the Portuguese had archived. The Operation Grange team reviewed over 40,000 documents from the Portuguese investigation, took 1,338 statements, collected 1,027 exhibits, investigated 650 sex offenders with connections to Portugal, examined 60-plus persons of interest, and followed up on 8,685 potential sightings from 101 countries. Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, who led Operation Grange from 2011 to 2014, brought systematic British investigative methodology to a case that had been marked by early forensic failures and investigative missteps. His team reconstructed the timeline of May 3, 2007, minute by minute. In October 2013, DCI Redwood announced a breakthrough that transformed the investigation's direction. His team had identified the man Jane Tanner saw carrying a child at 9:15. He was not an abductor. He was an innocent British holidaymaker named Julian Tarrant who had collected his 2-year-old daughter from the resort creche that evening. The timing, location, description, and clothing, including the child's pink pajamas, matched exactly. The revelation meant the investigation had spent 6 years pursuing a sighting that was irrelevant. But it also meant investigators needed a new timeline. If Tanner's sighting was eliminated, when had Madeleine actually been taken? The answer came from a sighting that had received less attention: the Smith family observation. Martin and Mary Smith, Irish tourists staying in Praia da Luz, reported seeing a man carrying a barefoot blonde child at approximately 10 o'clock, right around the time Kate McCann discovered Madeleine missing. The man walked toward the beach, roughly 500 yards from the McCann's apartment, carrying a girl who appeared to be sleeping or sedated. Scotland Yard concluded this sighting represented the approximate time of abduction. If accurate, it meant Madeleine had been taken sometime between Matthew Oldfield's check at 9:30 and Kate McCann's discovery at 10 o'clock, a 30-minute window rather than the 55-minute window between Jerry's and Kate's checks. Operation Grange developed a working theory. Madeleine McCann was abducted by a stranger in what was most likely either a planned kidnapping or a burglary gone wrong. Investigators noted a 4-fold increase in local burglaries between January and May 2007, with 2 break-ins in the McCann's apartment block in the 17 days before Madeleine's disappearance. The burglary theory suggested someone had entered apartment 5A, intending to steal valuables, encountered a sleeping child, and made a split-second decision to take her. The planned abduction theory suggested someone had been watching the resort, identified vulnerable children, studied the McCann's routine, and executed a carefully prepared kidnapping. Both theories required explaining how an intruder had entered. The unlocked patio doors remained the most likely entry point accessible from the street, unobservable from the restaurant, and definitively unlocked. The open window and raised shutter might have been the exit point, though the noise this would have created remained problematic. By 2016, Operation Grange had narrowed its focus to a small number of suspects. Portuguese media reported that British investigators were particularly interested in burglars who had been active in Praia da Luz in 2007. One name appeared repeatedly in intelligence reports: a German drifter with an extensive criminal record who had lived near the Ocean Club and fled Portugal shortly after Madeleine's disappearance. His name was Christian Brueckner. Christian Brueckner was born on December 16, 1976, in Würzburg, Bavaria. His birth mother gave him up, and he spent his early childhood in institutional care before being adopted. The adoption did not prevent what would become a lifetime defined by criminality. Brueckner's criminal record began at age 15 with burglary. At 17, in 1994, he committed his first known sex offense, the abuse of a 6-year-old girl in a Würzburg playground. A German court convicted him and imposed a 2-year sentence. Upon his release in 1995, the 18-year-old Brueckner made a decision that would define his next 12 years. He left Germany for Portugal. The Algarve region of southern Portugal attracted Brueckner for reasons both practical and predatory. The area's economy depended on tourism, creating seasonal work opportunities in hotels and restaurants. The transient population of holidaymakers created opportunities for theft. The warm climate allowed rough living in vehicles or abandoned buildings, and the relative lack of sophisticated law enforcement infrastructure compared to Germany created freedom from scrutiny. Brueckner settled initially around Lagos, a coastal town approximately 6 miles from the smaller village of Praia da Luz. He worked odd jobs in catering and hospitality while reportedly committing burglaries at hotels and holiday apartments. German prosecutors would later describe this period as one where Brueckner supported himself primarily through crime while maintaining enough legitimate employment to avoid intense police attention. His pattern of offending was established early. He targeted holiday properties, often entering through windows or unlocked doors. He stole valuables, but also exhibited disturbing sexual behavior. German investigators have connected him to at least 3 sexual assaults in the Algarve between 2000 and 2007, though only one resulted in conviction. The convicted offense occurred in September 2005 and demonstrated the violent, predatory nature that would later make Brueckner a prime suspect in Madeleine's disappearance. The victim was a 72-year-old American woman vacationing alone in her beachside home in Praia da Luz, less than 400 meters from where the McCanns would stay 18 months later. The attack occurred at night. Brueckner broke into the woman's home, disabled the phone line, then bound, gagged, and blindfolded his victim. He whipped her with a metal rod before sexually assaulting her. The assault lasted hours. The victim later testified that her attacker clearly enjoyed torturing her and demonstrated no remorse or hesitation. The woman's description of her attacker was detailed, but in 2005 led nowhere. Portuguese police had no suspects. The case remained open but unsolved. Brueckner left Portugal in 2007, and the crime might have remained forever unresolved, except for a single piece of forensic evidence: hair samples recovered from the scene. When German investigators began examining Brueckner's connection to unsolved crimes in Portugal in 2016, they requested DNA analysis of evidence from the 2005 rape. The hair samples from the American woman's home matched Brueckner's DNA. A German court convicted him of this rape in December 2019 and imposed a 7-year sentence. But in 2007, Brueckner remained unknown to investigators as a violent sexual predator. He lived in the Praia da Luz area, moving between properties, vehicles, and temporary accommodations. In April 2007, the month before Madeleine McCann disappeared, Brueckner's living situation changed significantly. He had been staying in a ramshackle farmhouse approximately 1 mile from the Ocean Club resort. The property, which he did not own, sat isolated on rural land outside the village center. In mid-April, Brueckner moved out of this farmhouse and into a 1993 Volkswagen T3 Westphalia campervan, a distinctive vehicle with a white upper body and yellow lower body that would later feature prominently in police appeals. After Brueckner moved out, someone cleaned the farmhouse thoroughly. When German investigators searched the property years later, they found little of forensic value except for one item: a bag containing multiple wigs. The significance of wigs in a property used by someone who committed burglaries and assaults would not be lost on investigators. On May 3, 2007, Christian Brueckner's documented presence in the Praia da Luz area became crucial. German prosecutors possess phone records showing that Brueckner's Portuguese mobile phone number was in contact with a cell tower at or near the Ocean Club resort that evening. The specific evidence that German prosecutors consider their strongest comprises a phone call received on Brueckner's Portuguese mobile between 32 minutes past 7 and 2 minutes past 8 in the evening, approximately 1 hour before Madeleine McCann vanished. The call lasted 30 minutes. The phone's connection to the network indicates it was physically near the Ocean Club when this call occurred. Prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters explained the evidence carefully. "We know that the phone number, which was used by our suspect on May 3, 2007, was connecting to the mast, which belongs to the Ocean Club in Praia da Luz, but he also acknowledged a critical limitation. The phone number placed Christian to the Ocean Club, but we have to find out which person uses this phone at this time. This qualification matters enormously. Phone records prove a device was near the Ocean Club. They do not definitively prove Brueckner held that device. He could have loaned it to someone. It could have been stolen. Without additional evidence placing Brueckner himself at the scene, The phone record establishes proximity, but not presence. The day after Madeleine disappeared, May 4, 2007, Brueckner took several actions that prosecutors interpret as consciousness of guilt. He re-registered his 1993 Jaguar XJR6 sedan in someone else's name. Though he continued driving the vehicle, the prepaid mobile phone that had been near the Ocean Club the previous evening was deregistered the following day. Both actions could be explained innocuously. Brueckner had a long history of minor fraud involving vehicle registrations to avoid insurance payments. Prepaid phone deregistrations were common among people living transient lifestyles. But the timing within 24 hours of a massive police investigation beginning in the area where Brueckner lived and committed crimes struck prosecutors as significant. Brueckner left Portugal in 2007, returning to Germany. His criminal activity continued. German authorities compiled a record that would eventually include 17 entries by 2020. Theft, drug offenses, fraud, and multiple sex offenses involving children. In 2009, German police arrested Brueckner for drug trafficking. A search of his property revealed disturbing materials. Images of child sexual abuse on USB drives and other digital storage devices. He was convicted and served a sentence, but the material seized during this arrest would become crucial evidence when investigators later connected him to Madeleine McCann. The images were not the only disturbing discovery. Investigators found approximately 75 children's swimming costumes and toys, far more than any reasonable explanation could account for. They found writings describing fantasies about drugging and abusing young girls. They recovered records of Skype conversations with other pedophiles, in which Brueckner discussed wanting to capture something small and use it for days. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of a man with escalating predatory interests in children, particularly young girls. Combined with his established pattern of breaking into holiday properties, his presence in Praia da Luz in May 2007, and his specific proximity to the Ocean Club on the evening of May 3, Brueckner became the subject of intense investigation. But this investigation did not become public until June 2020. Scotland Yard and German prosecutors had been working since at least 2017 to build a case connecting Brueckner to Madeleine's disappearance. They worked quietly, reviewing evidence, conducting searches in Germany and Portugal, and attempting to locate witnesses who might place Brueckner specifically at the Ocean Club on May 3. The decision to go public came after investigators concluded they had taken the case as far as possible through covert investigation. On June 3, 2020, German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters held a press conference that would dominate global headlines. He announced that German authorities were investigating Christian Brueckner in connection with the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Wolters went further than typical prosecutorial caution would suggest. He stated that investigators believed Madeleine was dead, that they were investigating a murder, and that Brueckner was their suspect. "We are assuming that the girl is dead," Wolters told reporters. When asked if they had evidence to support this, he replied, "We have strong evidence that Christian B. killed Maddie McCann, but we don't have forensic evidence." The public naming of Brueckner generated thousands of tips. The German investigation team, based in Braunschweig, where Brueckner had last lived, received information about his movements, his associates, his vehicles, and his behavior in 2007. Some tips proved valuable, most did not. Portuguese authorities formally designated Brueckner an arguido, an official suspect, in April 2022. This legal status meant prosecutors believed they had sufficient evidence to justify focusing their investigation on him, while also protecting certain legal rights. Brueckner possessed as a suspect rather than merely a person of interest. But the evidence remained circumstantial. Phone records placed his device near the scene. His vehicle matched general descriptions from potential witnesses. His criminal history established him as a violent sexual predator who targeted victims in the exact area where Madeleine was taken. His behavior after May 3, the vehicle re-registration, the phone deregistration, his departure from Portugal, could be interpreted as flight from scrutiny. Yet none of this directly connected Brueckner to apartment 5A. No forensic evidence from the apartment matched him. No witness could definitively place him there that night. No physical evidence of Madeleine had been found in any location connected to Brueckner. German prosecutors also possessed what they considered a potential confession, though one so problematic it could not support charges. Helgi Busching, a former friend of Brueckner's, claimed that at a gathering in Germany in May 2017, the 10th anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance, Brueckner made incriminating statements after becoming drunk. According to Busching, when the conversation turned to the McCann case, Brueckner said words to the effect of, "She didn't scream." If true, This statement would be devastating evidence of guilty knowledge. But Bushing's credibility was destroyed during Brueckner's trial for other sex offenses in 2024. Defense attorneys established that Bushing had been convicted of multiple offenses himself, had previously lied to authorities, and had financial incentives to provide information about Brueckner. The court found his testimony unreliable. Without the confession, without forensic evidence, without eyewitnesses, German prosecutors found themselves in an extraordinary position. They believed they had identified Madeleine McCann's abductor, but they could not prove it in court. Prosecutor Wolters has been remarkably candid about this problem. "He is not just our number one suspect, he's the only suspect," Wolters stated in August 2025. But he acknowledged, "We have evidence, but not strong enough to make a guilty verdict likely." The evidentiary standard in German criminal courts is proof beyond reasonable doubt. Prosecutors must establish not merely that a suspect could have committed a crime, or probably committed a crime, but that the evidence excludes all reasonable alternative explanations. The circumstantial case against Brueckner, however compelling in aggregate, did not meet this standard. In October 2024, this evidentiary weakness became publicly apparent when a Braunschweig court tried Brueckner for 3 counts of aggravated rape and 2 counts of child sexual abuse charges, completely unrelated to the McCann case. These offenses allegedly occurred in Portugal between 2000 and 2017. Prosecutors hoped convictions would keep Brueckner imprisoned while they continued building the McCann case. On October 8, 2024, the court acquitted Brueckner of all charges. Judge Uta Engemann explained that witness testimony proved unreliable and forensic evidence was insufficient. "Even a Christian Brueckner has the right to have a constitutional fair trial," she stated, emphasizing that courts must base convictions on evidence, not suspicion or character. The acquittals meant Brueckner's scheduled release from his earlier rape conviction could not be delayed. On September 17, 2025, after serving 7 years for the 2005 rape of the American woman, Christian Brueckner walked out of Sehende prison near Hanover. He now lives under electronic monitoring in Germany, required to report monthly to a probation officer, with his passport confiscated. He has refused interview requests from Metropolitan Police. He has consistently denied any involvement in Madeleine McCann's disappearance through his attorneys. German prosecutors continue investigating, still searching for the evidence that would convert certainty to convictable proof. The German investigation's certainty about Brueckner's guilt led to multiple large-scale searches in Portugal, attempting to locate physical evidence connecting him to Madeleine McCann. These operations represented some of the most extensive forensic searches in the case's history and produced few definitive results. In May 2023, German, Portuguese, and British investigators conducted a 3-day joint operation at the Barragem do Arade Reservoir, approximately 31 miles from Praia da Luz. The location was chosen based on cell phone data and photographs, showing Brueckner had frequented the remote reservoir area, which Portuguese media reported he called his little paradise. The search deployed sophisticated resources, trained sniffer dogs capable of detecting human remains underwater, drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras, police divers, and ground-penetrating radar. Teams methodically searched the shoreline, shallow waters, and surrounding terrain. Portuguese television broadcast live coverage as investigators worked in summer heat. Several objects were recovered and secured for forensic analysis. German prosecutors declined to specify what these items were, citing the ongoing investigation, but no significant breakthrough was announced following the search. If Madeleine's remains had been concealed at the reservoir, the 3-day operation did not locate them. The most extensive search operation occurred June 3 through 5, 2025, in the Atalaya area near Lagos. German BKA investigators, the Bundeskriminalamt, Germany's federal criminal police, scanned approximately 120 acres of land around a cottage previously used by Brueckner. The target locations included derelict buildings, wells, abandoned structures, and open land. Ground-penetrating radar capable of scanning 15 feet deep was deployed across the site. The technology can detect density anomalies underground that might indicate disturbed earth or buried objects. Teams worked systematically, marking areas of interest for excavation. German media reported that fragments of clothing, bone fragments, and 2 buried firearms were discovered during the search. All materials were sent for forensic analysis. Prosecutors cautioned that bone fragments could be from animals and clothing could be unrelated refuse. Months after the search, no announcements of breakthrough findings had been made. The forensic analysis either revealed nothing connected to Madeleine or prosecutors were maintaining investigative secrecy about what was found. The intensive searches demonstrated the enormous resources still being devoted to the case 18 years after Madeleine's disappearance. But they also highlighted the investigation's fundamental problem. Without knowing what happened to Madeleine, where she was taken, or what an abductor did afterward, investigators were searching blind. Portugal's landscape offers countless locations where remains could be concealed. The Algarve alone contains hundreds of square miles of rural terrain, coastline, forests, and abandoned properties. While German investigators pursued Brueckner methodically, the case continued attracting false leads, attention seekers, and individuals convinced of their connection to Madeleine McCann. The most disruptive was Julia Wandelt, a Polish woman in her early 20s who became convinced she was Madeleine. Wandelt noted physical similarities between herself and Madeleine's published photographs, including what she believed was a matching coloboma defect in her eye. She created social media accounts in February 2023, claiming to be Madeleine and requesting DNA testing to prove her identity. The accounts went viral, generating millions of views and intense media coverage. Dr. Fia Johansson, a private investigator and psychic, became involved with Wandelt's case and facilitated DNA testing. The results were definitive. Wandelt was 100% Polish, with no British ancestry and no familial connection to the McCanns. The coloboma she believed matched Madeleine's eye was not a coloboma but a different, common eye characteristic. Most people would have accepted this conclusion. Wandelt did not. Undeterred by DNA proof that she was not Madeleine McCann, she traveled to Praia da Luz. She showed up twice uninvited at the McCann family home in Rothley, Leicestershire. She called Kate McCann's phone over 60 times in a single day in April 2024. The harassment escalated until police intervention became necessary. In November 2025, Leicester Crown Court found Julia Wandelt guilty of harassment. The judge sentenced her to 6 months imprisonment, though she was released for time already served in custody awaiting trial. A deportation order was issued requiring her return to Poland. Wandelt's case represented an extreme example of the phenomenon the McCann investigation has generated: people projecting their own narratives, traumas, or desires for attention onto a tragedy that captivated global consciousness. The McCanns have endured countless such intrusions over 18 years, people claiming to be Madeleine, claiming to know what happened, claiming to have visions or psychic knowledge of her location. Each false lead consumes investigative resources. Each requires police time to evaluate and, if necessary, debunk. Each generates renewed media coverage that brings the McCann's trauma back into public discourse. The accumulation of 18 years of false leads, conspiracy theories, cruel accusations, and attention-seeking imposters has added immeasurable suffering to a family already enduring the unimaginable. The case has also generated lasting impacts on policy, media ethics, and the small Portuguese town where Madeleine vanished. These ripple effects extend far beyond the McCanns themselves, affecting how child abductions are handled, how media reports on missing children, and how a community processes becoming synonymous with tragedy. Kate and Jerry McCann campaigned for enhancement of the United Kingdom's child rescue alert system following their experience. The system existed in 2007 but relied on television and radio broadcasts. The McCanns advocated for expansion to include text messages, emails, and digital billboard alerts that could reach the public immediately when a child went missing. The upgraded system was implemented in May 2014. Kate McCann recalled the frustration of that first night. When our little girl was taken from her bed, we mistakenly presumed that an alert would have gone out immediately to the public. We didn't realize that in the UK, an alert system didn't exist for missing children in the same way it does for missing adults. The Enhanced Child Rescue Alert has been activated multiple times since 2014 in cases of suspected child abduction in England and Wales. The system is credited with the rapid recovery of several children who might otherwise have come to serious harm. The McCann case, though it did not benefit from such a system, at least generated improvements that protected other children. The case became a defining example of media excess during the Leveson inquiry into press standards and ethics in the United Kingdom. Lord Justice Leveson's inquiry, established after the phone hacking scandal, examined media behavior across multiple high-profile cases. The McCann case featured prominently. Kate McCann testified before the inquiry about the experience of having her private diary written as a coping mechanism during the agonizing months after Madeleine's disappearance, published in the News of the World newspaper in September 2008. The diary contained her most intimate thoughts, fears, and moments of despair. Its publication without consent left her feeling in her words, totally violated. The Levison report cited the McCann's treatment alongside the Dowler family and Christopher Jeffries as among the most serious examples of egregious behavior, demonstrating a press indifferent to individual privacy and casual in its "can-accessor" approach to truth. The report documented how tabloid newspapers published unfounded allegations that the McCanns were responsible for their daughter's death, theories based on no credible evidence but generating enormous circulation numbers. Express newspapers, which had published particularly aggressive coverage suggesting the McCanns' guilt, ultimately paid £550,000 to the McCanns and £375,000 to the Tapas 7 in March 2008. The settlement included front-page apologies for articles suggesting the parents were responsible for their daughter's death, articles the publisher acknowledged were false. The financial settlements and public apologies represented rare accountability in the British tabloid industry, but they could not undo the damage. Millions of people had read headlines suggesting the McCanns killed their daughter. The corrections and apologies received a fraction of the attention the original false allegations had generated. For Praia da Luz, the impact has been inescapable and economically devastating. The small village of fewer than 3,000 permanent residents became globally synonymous with child abduction. Tourism, the lifeblood of the local economy, collapsed in the immediate aftermath. Restaurant owner Mariana Bayao recalled, "When that happened, we lost 50% of tourism. It was really bad. A lot of people lost work. Many businesses closed." Families who had operated guest houses, restaurants, and shops for generations found themselves with empty establishments as tourists chose other Algarve destinations. The economic impact eased gradually as years passed, and tourists forgot or chose to visit despite the association. But each new development, each search, each suspect announcement, each anniversary brings renewed media attention and renewed association between Praia da Luz and tragedy. Residents express profound frustration at their inability to escape this connection. During the June 2025 searches, one local resident told reporters, "They won't find anything because the ground is rock hard and this has been searched before. But they just keep bringing it up, and we can't move on." The Ocean Club Resort, where apartment 5A is located, has changed ownership and undergone renovations. The apartment itself has been renumbered and its appearance altered, but tourists still visit seeking the location where Madeleine vanished. The building cannot escape its place in history. Madeleine's Fund, established 12 days after her disappearance by the McCanns and their supporters, received extraordinary financial support. In its first year, the fund received £1.8 million in donations from the public and high-profile donors. Sir Philip Green contributed £250,000. Richard Branson donated £100,000. J.K. Rowling contributed an undisclosed substantial sum. The fund enabled the McCanns to hire private investigators, legal experts, and media consultants. It funded awareness campaigns across Europe and beyond. It offered a reward of £2.5 million for information leading to Madeleine's safe return, a reward that remains unclaimed 18 years later. The fund also supported the McCanns' living expenses as they reduced their medical practices to part-time work, unable to fully return to their careers while actively campaigning for their daughter. Critics questioned this use of donated funds, but trustees argued that enabling the parents to devote time to the search was precisely what donors intended to support. Operation Grange, meanwhile, has consumed £13.2 million of British taxpayer money as of March 2024. At its peak in 2012 to 2013, the operation cost £2.8 million annually and employed 37 personnel. By 2025, annual funding had decreased to £108,000, approved for the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year. The current team consists of just 3 part-time police officers and 1 civilian staff member. This skeleton crew maintains the investigation officially active, reviews any significant new information, and coordinates with German and Portuguese counterparts. But the era of large-scale British police operations on the case has effectively ended. The financial investment sparked debate about resource allocation. Why had British taxpayers spent over £13 million on a single missing child case when other families received no such support? The question was uncomfortable but legitimate. The McCanns' prominence, both doctors, articulate, media-savvy, with influential connections, undeniably contributed to the attention and resources their case received. Other missing children from less privileged families, families without media connections, families who were not white and middle class, received tiny fractions of the investigative attention and financial support. This disparity highlighted uncomfortable truths about whose suffering society deems worthy of extraordinary response. The criticism was not that Madeleine McCann deserved less support, but that other missing children deserved more. Christian Brueckner today lives in circumstances that reflect his status as a convicted rapist under ongoing investigation for murder, but against whom no charges can be filed. Upon his release from Sande prison on September 17, 2025, German authorities imposed electronic monitoring, monthly probation reporting requirements, and confiscation of his passport. He moves between motels and homeless shelters in Germany, surviving on approximately €1,000 monthly in welfare payments. Reporters and police monitor his movements. Private investigators hired by various media outlets track his activities, hoping for admissions or behavior that might provide the evidence German prosecutors lack. Brueckner has refused all interview requests from Metropolitan Police investigating the McCann case. Through his attorneys, he has consistently denied any involvement in Madeleine's disappearance. His lawyers have characterized the German investigation as a witch hunt based on circumstantial evidence and prejudice against a man with a criminal record. In August 2025, Brueckner's attorney, Friedrich Fulscher, told reporters, "There is no evidence my client was involved in this crime. The prosecutors have been saying for years they have evidence, but they have never produced any evidence that would stand up in court. This is trial by media, not justice." Prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters responds that his team works on the case every single day and will not rule out additional searches or investigative steps. He maintains that evidence exists but requires corroboration that has proved elusive. The investigation remains officially active, though whether it can progress beyond its current stalemate remains doubtful. The Portuguese investigation also continues, with Brueckner maintaining his status as an official arguido. Portuguese prosecutors coordinate with their German counterparts but have not announced significant independent investigative activity in recent years. The case that Portugal archived in July 2008 remains nominally open, but the substantive investigation occurs in Germany. Metropolitan Police's Operation Grange continues at minimal staffing levels. The 3 part-time officers and 1 civilian staff member maintain case files, review information as it arrives, and serve as the British liaison to German and Portuguese investigators. But the era of active British investigation effectively ended when funding was reduced from millions annually to just over £100,000. The McCanns, now in their late 50s, continue their advocacy from their home in Rothley, Leicestershire. Kate McCann works part-time as a general practitioner. Jerry McCann works as a consultant cardiologist. Their twins, Sean and Amelie, are now adults, having grown up in the shadow of their sister's disappearance. On the 18th anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance, in May 2025, Kate and Jerry released a statement. The years appear to be passing even more quickly, and whilst we have no significant news to share, our determination to leave no stone unturned is unwavering. We will never give up hope of finding Madeleine alive, but whatever the outcome, we need to know what happened. We need to find answers. This statement encapsulates the McCann's position after 18 years. They continue hoping Madeleine might be alive, while acknowledging the probability she is not, and they emphasize that knowledge, whatever the truth is essential for any form of closure. The question of whether Madeleine could be alive torments the investigation and the family. If she was abducted by a predator like Brueckner, the probability she survived more than the initial hours is vanishingly small. Sexual predators who abduct children typically kill them quickly, often within the first 3 hours, to eliminate the witness to their crime. But alternative scenarios exist. If Madeleine was taken for some reason other than sexual abuse, trafficking, illegal adoption, a disturbed person wanting a child, she could theoretically be alive. She would now be 22 years old, potentially with no memories of her early childhood or her true identity. Investigators have followed leads suggesting Madeleine might have been trafficked, might be living under a false identity somewhere in Europe or North Africa. None of these leads have proved credible. The trafficking theory in particular lacks supporting evidence. Child trafficking networks typically target vulnerable children from impoverished families where disappearances will not generate massive police investigations. A blonde British toddler, whose face would immediately be broadcast worldwide, represents an extraordinarily high-risk target. The most likely scenario remains that Madeleine died within hours of her abduction, that her body was concealed somewhere in Portugal, and that 18 years of weathering, decomposition, and environmental factors have made recovery increasingly unlikely. But absent physical evidence, this remains a probability, not a certainty. Gonzalo Amaral, now 71 years old, maintains his alternative theory. In interviews during 2025, he reiterated his position that Madeleine died in apartment 5A, that the cadaver dogs correctly identified death scent, and that the parents' involvement explains the lack of abduction evidence. His theory requires dismissing the phone evidence, placing Brueckner near the scene, explaining away multiple sightings of men carrying children that night, and believing that two grieving parents successfully deceived investigators across 3 countries for 18 years. Most investigators and independent analysts find Amaral's theory implausible, but he retains supporters in Portugal who believe the initial investigation's findings were dismissed too readily when British political pressure demanded focus shift away from the parents. The debate between abduction by stranger and death in apartment theories has consumed endless hours of investigative resources, media coverage, and public discussion. It represents the fundamental uncertainty that has plagued this case from the beginning. Without physical evidence, without definitive witnesses, without recovery of Madeleine's body, competing theories can all claim some supporting evidence, while none can be definitively proved. The case generated cultural impact extending beyond true crime interest. Madeleine's Fund website received 80 million visits in its first 3 months, an extraordinary level of public engagement. Musicians wrote songs about Madeleine. Artists created portraits. Vigils were held worldwide on anniversaries of her disappearance. The case became, for many people far removed from the McCanns or Portugal, a symbol of parental fear and childhood vulnerability. The phrase, "doing a Madeleine," briefly entered British slang as a crude joke about disappearance usage the McCanns found deeply hurtful and which generated public backlash against those employing it. The case entered popular culture in ways both supportive and exploitative. Netflix, the BBC, and other media organizations have produced multiple documentaries about the case. Each new documentary generates renewed public interest, renewed attention to the McCanns' suffering, and renewed speculation about what happened. The McCanns cooperated with some of these productions, hoping they might generate new information, but found others sensationalistic and unhelpful. The investigation has also generated significant academic interest in media ethics, missing persons procedures, international law enforcement cooperation, and forensic investigation methodology. Multiple scholarly papers have analyzed various aspects of the case. It serves as a teaching example in journalism schools about media responsibility and in law enforcement training about preserving crime scenes and managing high-profile investigations. For criminal justice professionals, the case represents both a cautionary tale and a demonstration of unprecedented international cooperation. The initial Portuguese investigation's failures, contaminated crime scene, delayed roadblocks, mishandled evidence, are studied as examples of what not to do. But the subsequent cooperation among British, German, and Portuguese authorities, despite jurisdictional complexities and different legal systems, represents unprecedented sustained international law enforcement collaboration. The 18 years since Madeleine's disappearance have seen dramatic changes in technology available to investigators. In 2007, social media barely existed, smartphones were not ubiquitous, DNA analysis was less sophisticated, and cell phone tracking was less precise. Had Madeleine disappeared in 2025 instead of 2007, investigators would have had access to tools that might have made crucial differences. Surveillance cameras would have been more prevalent. Digital forensics capabilities would have been more advanced. Social media would have enabled faster dissemination of appeals for information. But these technological advances came too late for the McCann investigation. The crucial evidence was lost in those first hours, when crime scene preservation failed and roadblocks were not established. The question that haunts everyone connected to this case is whether Madeleine's disappearance could have been prevented. The answer is almost certainly yes, through numerous small decisions that, in aggregate, created the opportunity an abductor exploited. If the McCanns had not left the apartment unlocked, if they had used the Ocean Club's babysitting service, if the checking rotation had been more frequent, if they had stayed in the apartment that evening, if the resort had not written about their routine in a semi-public message book, any one of these different decisions would likely have meant Madeleine McCann would be a 22-year-old woman today instead of a child frozen forever at age 3 in public memory. But hindsight makes everything clear. The McCanns made decisions that millions of parents on holiday make. They balanced enjoying their vacation with checking on sleeping children, they assessed the risks as manageable, and they believed their children were safe. They were wrong, and that misjudgment has defined their lives. Whether this misjudgment constituted negligence is a question that has been debated endlessly. Portuguese law includes provisions for abandonment of a minor, and some argued the McCanns should have been prosecuted under this statute. Others argued that leaving children alone for short periods with regular checking does not constitute abandonment, that the dining location within the resort created reasonable proximity, and that prosecuting grieving parents served no purpose beyond vengeance. Portuguese prosecutors ultimately declined to charge the McCanns with any offense. The British authorities conducted their own assessment and similarly concluded no charges were warranted. But public opinion remained divided, with significant percentages in polls expressing belief that the parents bore some responsibility for creating the circumstances that allowed abduction. This public judgment added another layer of suffering to an already unbearable situation. The McCanns have endured not only the loss of their daughter but also public accusations that they caused that loss through negligence or worse. They have been investigated, surveilled, accused, libeled, and harassed. They have had their grief questioned, their emotions analyzed by armchair experts, their every statement dissected for hidden meaning. The investigation stands today in a state of suspended animation. German prosecutors believe they know who took Madeleine but cannot prove it. British investigators have reduced their operation to minimal staffing while maintaining the case technically active. Portuguese authorities coordinate with their international counterparts but conduct little independent investigation, and Christian Brueckner lives under monitoring in Germany, presumably aware that prosecutors desperately want to charge him but acknowledge they cannot. The likelihood of breakthrough developments diminishes with each passing year. Witnesses' memories fade. Physical evidence degrades. People with potential knowledge die. The enormous public and media attention that once generated thousands of tips has declined as other tragedies capture attention. The case risks sliding from active investigation to cold case, from cold case to historical mystery. Yet the McCanns continue hoping, continue advocating, continue insisting that answers exist and must be found. Their determination, after 18 years of disappointment, false leads, and investigative dead ends, represents either admirable persistence or inability to accept an unbearable reality, or, most likely, both simultaneously. The case that generated 80 million website visits in 3 months, appeals from David Beckham and J.K. Rowling, testimony before the Pope, meetings with government leaders across Europe, and cost 3 nations tens of millions in investigative expenses, ends its 18th year, precisely where it has remained since that warm Thursday evening in the Algarve, with more questions than answers, a family still waiting, and a little girl who vanished without a trace. Christian Brueckner may be guilty. He may have taken Madeleine McCann from apartment 5, while her parents dined 55 meters away, believing their children were safe. The circumstantial evidence suggests this possibility compellingly. But compelling possibility is not proof beyond reasonable doubt, and without that proof, Brueckner will never face trial for the world's most famous, unsolved child disappearance. Unless physical evidence emerges, a body, forensic material definitively linking Brueckner to the crime, a witness with unimpeachable credibility, the case will likely remain forever unsolved. The probability of such evidence emerging after 18 years is small and decreasing. Kate and Jerry McCann will continue their lives marked permanently by May 3, 2007. Their twins will carry forever the shadow of a sister they barely remember, but who defines their family's public identity. Praia da Luz will remain the place where Madeleine McCann vanished, unable to escape that association, and somewhere in an unmarked grave, in scattered remains nature has reclaimed. In a location investigators have not yet considered, Madeleine herself waits to be found. The investigation continues, though barely. The hope persists, though dimmed by years of disappointment. The questions remain, most of them likely to remain forever unanswered. 18 years have passed since a 3-year-old girl disappeared from a holiday apartment. 18 years of investigation, accusation, speculation, and heartbreak. 18 years without answers, without closure, without justice. And the world watches still, hoping against diminishing probability that somehow, someday, someone will finally explain what happened to Madeleine McCann on that evening in Praia da Luz, when the world's most scrutinized missing child case began and has never truly ended. Madeleine McCann would be 22 years old today. She might have finished university, started a career, fallen in love, lived all the moments stolen from her on May 3, 2007. Instead, she remains forever 3 years old in the world's memory. Frozen in those photographs her parents distributed worldwide, hoping someone, somewhere, would recognize their little girl. This case reminds us that behind every investigation, every piece of evidence, every prosecutor's statement, there is a child who deserved to grow up. 18 years of questions without answers, a family still waiting, and a little girl the world refuses to forget.